Dog Works Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome everybody. This is Robert Forto and you're listening to the Iditarod 2020 coverage here on Mushing Radio on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site, and you can find all of our episodes over on DogWorksRadio.com. I am joined today by my co-host for our Iditarod coverage. His name is Alex Stein. Alex, how's it going today?
It's going great, Robert. I was just going to say that I feel a little guilty because you told me before we got on the air that you have spent a lot of time today shoveling snow. You have just been dumped on in terms of the snow. And I am sitting here in nice, warm Southern California where it's actually about to rain. So I feel slightly guilty that I have not been out shoveling snow.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we've been outside for 7 hours today shoveling snow, and this has a big deal with the Iditarod too, because pretty much they are right here in this same area of the state. But man, we have gotten dumped on in the last 48 to 72 hours or so. We probably have about 3 feet of snow coming down just this weekend, and I'm sure it's very similar on the Iditarod Trail as we saw with the restart here in Willow, which is just about 4 miles up the road. It looked pretty much the same here, but boy, I tell you what, that's going to cause some interesting stories as they develop, isn't it?
It really is. And in fact, I was looking at the times for the front of the pack primarily coming into checkpoints this year as opposed to last year. And it looks like a little over a day into the race, the front of the pack is already running approximately 6 hours behind what they were running last year. And, you know, you can't extrapolate that out to the end of the race. It's not going to be 6 hours a day for 2 weeks or for 10 days. But that is a large amount of time for the first day and 6 or 7 hours.
Yeah, I totally see that on the leaderboard as well. And what I find real interesting is that the fastest time so far in terms of miles per hour is Jessie Royer. She's averaging just over 10 miles an hour, which is about 1.5 miles faster than the next fastest team. Now, as you said, we can't do much with that here in the first 24 hours, but as you said in your folks that you would like to see win, she is doing very well in the first day or so, isn't she?
She really is. She is burning up the trail, and we've started to see in the very beginning of the race, we saw a lot of people seem to be hanging back just a little bit. And then over the past few hours this afternoon, we've seen a lot of the people that I expect, and I think that you expect, and most people who've been watching Iditarod for a while expect to be right at the front, have kind of moved up so that they are now, in the top 10 or at least in the top 15. So it's going to be a very, very interesting race. And I think that one of the things we're going to see is a lot more of a spread between when the first where the first teams are and where the last teams are. And in the past, that has been a source of some potential problems, because if a team is viewed as being uncompetitive, then they can be withdrawn from the race. So, obviously that's not a problem right now, but starting 3 or 4 or 5 days from now, I think teams who are really lagging are going to find themselves really being in danger of perhaps being withdrawn from the race.
What I find also interesting, Alex, it looks like 29 mushers are already into Rainy Pass, so they've already gone down the Happy River Steps, as they call it, and most of the rest of the folks are in Finger Lake, with just the last 3 whom are in Squintno or have recently left there. So a good majority of the field, more than half of the field, is already through Finger Lake, or Rainy Pass, which is really encouraging this early in the game. And you know what is also interesting, Alex, is since this race started a week later than typical, we've already seen daylight savings time. And I think that people are going to use that to their advantage a little bit, because I was remarking to my wife, Michelle, last night that it was already 8:30 and it was still light. And when you see daylight savings time much later in the race, typically it's almost when the race is over. Now, some of the most difficult parts of the trail, they can run in the daylight, which I think is a big advantage to a lot of mushers. Do you agree?
Yeah, it really is. As we talked about yesterday, and we've talked about a lot in the past on this show, there's dogs generally do a little bit better running at night. A lot of mushers prefer running at night, but there are some times when you're dealing with a really technically difficult portion of the race where you want to be able to see as much as you can. So that's definitely going to help. And the other thing about the race starting later than it usually does, and it's always the ceremonial start is always the first Saturday in March, but because the first Saturday was the 7th, that meant that the race didn't really start with the restart until the 8th, which is very, very late. So in Alaska, I believe you are gaining 4 or 5 minutes of daylight per day at this point. So that means that, next week there's going to be an extra half hour of daylight. And the week after that, there's going to be a full extra hour of daylight compared to what you have now.
Right. And speaking of the Happy River Steps, I saw some post early this morning. I believe it was on the Squid Acres page. Paige Drobny's husband is the one that is posting there. He said that they don't anticipate any real problems going through the Happy River Steps because there's just so much snow. And he equated it to a bowling ball going down the gutter. And if you've ever gone bowling, you know exactly what we're talking about when we say gutter ball. That is a lot different than typical, isn't it?
It really is. And that's one of the areas that people dread and that there are all sorts of stories about. And that's where a lot of photographers will sort of camp out and try to catch teams that are falling over or hanging on for dear life or wiping out. And really, there have been some absolute horror stories about that area of the race. And it's very fortunate that, in that first third of the race, that there is just a lot of snow. And often, in places like the Farewell Burn, there is very little snow and sometimes no snow at all. So to have a really good snow cover is an unusual thing for Iditarod. And I think that it's hopefully going to make that area of the trail a lot safer and a lot easier for some of the teams. And I don't mean easy in terms of time, but I mean easy in terms of not having people hurt themselves, not having dogs strain muscles or hurt themselves. So that hopefully that's one of the advantages of having so much snow cover.
So, Alex, let's jump over to some of the news of the day. The first story that you would like to report on is sort of the story of the race so far with John Schandelmeyer, Zoya Denur's husband, that took over at the last minute, literally. What do you know on that so far?
So Zoya had posted yesterday commenting on another post that she had gone to the emergency room yesterday morning at 9 a.m. And, to keep in mind, at 9 a.m. is usually when teams who are staying in Anchorage are driving up the highway to get to Willow for the restart. But at 9 a.m., she was in the ER. She said that she had extremely rapid heartbeat and was treated there for almost 6 hours. And then John went up to Willow, and the decision was made that he would take the team on the trail. And now we talked about how there was an emergency meeting of the entry board, or whatever that organization is called, on Tuesday night when Jeff King had to withdraw. Apparently the rules of Iditarod call for, if there is an emergency on the morning, on the day of the restart, that the race marshal, which is Mark Nordman, can make an emergency decision. So what happened, which we didn't really find out about until there was a press release like 8 or 9 hours later, is that Mark Nordman had made that decision on site at Willow. And apparently John had to borrow some snow pants from another musher who was able to give him snow pants and some other gear so that he could at least get started down the trail. There had been a lot of talk about, well, isn't this shifting out one musher for another, because technically Zoya had run the 11 miles of the ceremonial start in Anchorage, and the ruling was that it is, if you make that switch before the restart, that it doesn't count as switching in the middle. And I was having a conversation with some people earlier, and we were talking about how the ceremonial start is an odd animal because it does count in certain ways, but it also doesn't count at all in other ways. So, for example, if this had happened to Zoya when she was in Yetna, she would be out of the race and her team would be out of the race. But because it happened before the restart in Willow, John was able to step in. And one of the things that Mark Nordman said is that this was a decision made for the good of their team, and because the team had been trained and was all ready to run, that it wasn't viewed as fair to penalize the dogs for this health issue that happened to Zoya in the morning. And it's hard for me to argue with that. We hear all the time that from mushers and from Iditarod fans and from people involved in the race, that it is all about the dogs. And as was the case with Jeff King having Sean Underwood run, this makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would like to mention to you, Alex, I'm sure you may know more about this than I, but it's my understanding that John is considered a rookie. I guess he ran the Iditarod several years ago, maybe even a decade or two, but he's scratched, so that makes him technically a rookie. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, he ran it in 93, and apparently he either scratched or was withdrawn in or around safety. And as people know, safety is only 22 miles from Nome. So he actually, even though he wasn't officially still in the race, he kept going with his dogs and brought his dogs to Nome. But because he hasn't officially finished, he is considered a rookie. He's also won the Yukon Quest twice in the 1990s. I believe he hasn't run a mid or a long distance race in at least a decade. Although I could be wrong about that, but that's my understanding. But because he had completed the qualifications, even though it was back in the 90s, Mark Nordman made the decision, on the fly there in Willow, that he would be allowed to take the dogs on.
Interesting story for sure. I'm sure that he will do just fine out there. He is a true dog man for sure. I follow those guys on Facebook, and he is always out doing something with the dogs where they're going. They live out near the Denali Highway on the opposite side of Cantwell, and they're always taking their dogs out for 100-mile runs and going out and exploring and expeditions and all that sort of stuff. So he is not a quote-unquote rookie as most people would think of the word, but I think he's going to do just fine. Even if he did have to borrow some snow pants and a parka or whatever, I'm sure he will finish just fine. So the next story that we want to talk about, Alex, is the ugly dogs. And for anybody that's followed this show, or pretty much Iditarod in general over the last couple of years, know exactly what the term ugly dogs means, but they have a special thing that they do during the race. Can you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, so this started last year when Blair Braverman was running, and there was an interview with her, I believe, on the Insider or maybe some other local TV station, an interview where they were talking about one of the principals at one of the villages in the schools was talking about trying to raise money to, I believe, send a small group of kids to Anchorage so they could go to museums and do something, educational along those lines. And she was lamenting the fact that they didn't think that they'd be able to make this trip because they hadn't been able to raise enough money for it. And a couple of the ugly dogs, who are the fans of Blair Braverman and Quince Mountain from Braver Mountain Mushing, decided that they would try to get people to fund this school trip. And so they put up a GoFundMe, and it was funded within a couple of hours. And the principal asked them to take the GoFundMe down the next day because they had enough money and she didn't want people to keep giving money when it was not necessary. But the bunch of the people who are sort of the hardcore base of the ugly dogs decided that they would find other educational projects in Alaska with an emphasis on rural schools out in the bush and native projects that needed funding. And they put together a Google document and a spreadsheet and encouraged people to start giving to these projects. And they wound up under the with the name Iditarod, and they wound up funding a whole bunch of these projects and raised well over $100,000 to do this within, I think, less than a week. And this was all happening while Blair was on the trail, and she was completely unaware of it while it was going on. And so that's a really amazing and wonderful thing. And as you know, and as I know, the internet can sometimes be a dark place, and people misbehave and people act in horrendous ways sometimes on the internet. And it's just great to be able to see the internet used to do something like this, which is just purely something that is good and that, tangibly helps people. So this year they are doing the Iditarod again. Quince had a hashtag attached to his sled that says Iditarod. He mentioned Iditarod in his speech at the banquet, and people who are interested can go to iditarod.com, and there's a number of categories. There are There are categories for Donors Choose, which is all school projects. And I was just looking before we were recording this. It looks like they've raised just in a couple of days over $12,000 for school projects. And in addition, there are some community projects in and around Alaska that are projects that Blair and Quince have taken a particular liking to, and that their supporters can give money to. And again, I just think that this is a terrific thing. And quite honestly, if I were the new CEO of Iditarod, one of the first things I would do after the race is over is to sit down with Blair and Quince and discuss with them how they have been able to use the internet and use social media in order to, bring new people into this sport and have people do things that are really just very positive and wonderful.
And we've said this a bunch, especially during our coverage last year. This has really changed the face of how people interact with mushing and the Iditarod, in particular, the Ugly Dogs group. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about the Ugly Dogs group as we continue our coverage for the next couple of weeks. But what's interesting, you talked about the Iditarod CEO. There was a story right before the race where he said that the race is looking for relevance. Kind of in a busy world that we live in with everything going on, is this race still relevant? And just by the sight of what these guys do on social media, the Ugly Dogs crew, I think that is a good point of relevance. Don't you agree?
I absolutely do. And I know that there are some people who are, especially older fans and certainly a lot of older mushers who I anticipate will be a little bit reluctant to do some of these things or to go in this direction, or will feel like it goes against the tradition. But I think that there is a way to do this that really enhances the tradition and enhances a lot of the things that have already been built up about the race.
I'm looking forward to seeing what projects they fund this year for sure, and we'll definitely talk about this more as we go. Alex, one of the things that we do every night here on our Iditarod coverage is a musher profile where we dive deep into that, and we're going to do that in just a second. Unless you have some other news, we'll jump right into it.
Yeah, let's jump right into that.
Okay, let's do it. Who are we talking about today?
So today, and I apologize right now for tonight and for all other nights of this podcast for mispronouncing people's names. Tonight we are talking about rookie Martin, and I believe his last name is pronounced Massacati, or perhaps Massacot. He is a rookie this year. He was the first out of Willow, running with bib number 2. He's from Saint Tite, Quebec. And he is 52 years old. He's been working in paving, blacktop and paving for over 30 years. He was always someone who was involved with dogs. And like a lot of other mushers, we've heard these stories that when he was a kid, he put a harness on his St. Bernard and tried to get him to pull him around on a little sled. He has been mushing since 1996, mostly short and medium distance and mostly on the East Coast and the Midwest. He won the Can-Am Crown 250, which is a mid-distance race in Maine in 1998, after he'd only been mushing for a couple of years. And since then, he's gone on to win it 9 more times. So he has won that race 10 times. He ran the Yukon Quest in 2003 and finished 6th. He's done a variety of mid-distance races over the past 15 years. He says that he prefers to travel alone rather than traveling with other teams, and says that's what he did on the Quest, and it served him very well, and that's what he plans to do on the Iditarod. I think he's going to discover that the Iditarod is a different beast than the Quest. It's first of all, there's a lot more teams out there, and there are a lot more checkpoints. So it would be interesting to see if he's actually going to stick to that plan. He told his hometown newspaper that his goal is to go 130 miles per day, and his first cut at a run rest cycle is to try to go 50 miles, then rest for a couple of hours, and then do another 50 miles, and just repeat that kind of run rest schedule as long as he can. Of course, if conditions warrant it, he'll change that up, but that was his initial plan. He drove up to Alaska in February with 16 dogs, and that's a small amount of dogs. A lot of kennels will have like 20 or 24 dogs that are seriously in the running for the 14 slots on the Iditarod, but he came up with only 16 dogs, which didn't give him a lot of leeway in terms of picking which dogs are going to go and which dogs are going to stay. He stopped along the way to run the John Bear Grease race, but ended up scratching in that. And a few weeks ago, he ran this race called the Silver Sled 100, which is a stage race that starts and ends in Haines. And he came in 7th in that. He was the first racer out, and for most of the last 24 hours has been running fairly near the front of the pack. He's drifted back a little now as the faster teams and the teams that I expect to be faster over the next week have passed him. But he's still, as we're recording this, running in 10th. He's moving at a really good clip. And he told his hometown paper that he has zero expectations. And he said, when you put yourself under pressure, you stop sleeping. And since I don't plan to sleep too much, I'm just viewing this as a personal challenge, a life experience. And I'm going there because I want to be the best that I can possibly be as a musher and travel Alaska with these dogs. And I think that he's definitely off to a really good start. The big challenge, I think, for a musher like this who has done a tremendous amount of races on the East Coast and in the Midwest is, first of all, just adjusting to the differences in the trail in Alaska, and then secondly, remembering that this is a very, very, very long race. I heard Dallas Seavey doing the commentary for one of the TV stations the other day, and he was talking about how it's really important to view a race like Iditarod as a bunch of small sections of the race, each of which sets up the next section and the sections that are to come. So it's I always worry a little bit when I see rookies who are very, very far in front early in the race, because I am not positive that their dogs will be able to sustain. So hopefully he is keeping this in mind and perhaps scaling back a little bit so that his dogs can really do their best and go all the way for 1,000 miles. But he's a very interesting racer and is, I believe, the first Quebecer to run the Iditarod.
So cool. I love these stories, Alex. I never know who we're going to talk about until right before we air. And as you were talking about Martin, we always compare the Iditarod to other professional sports, and I was thinking about Major League Baseball. And I say that because oftentimes in Major League Baseball, somebody will come out of nowhere and all of a sudden be an all-star, whether it's a pitcher or a catcher or a hitter or whatever. But they've been paying their dues in the minor leagues for years, and we don't know about them until they really hit the big time. And that's what it sort of sounds like with Martin. I mean, he's been doing this for 24 years, and this is the first time we've really ever heard his name in terms of the big time, in terms of Iditarod or anything like that. You said he had run the Quest, but a guy like this is really what makes the stories of Iditarod, I believe. And that's what you and I focus on our coverage, is these little-known folks, and I love that, and I know our fans love that as well. I wish Martin the best. I hope he does very well. I know you and I were trying to contemplate a Rookie of the Year, and I don't know if it's going to be Martin yet, even though we're only a day into the race. But if he continues to burn up the trail like he's doing on that 50-mile run-rest cycle, I think he'll do pretty good.
Yeah, I think he will. There's a number of really, really top-notch rookies who are racing this year, and it's going to be very exciting to see who's going to be that Rookie of the Year.
I'm looking forward to it. Alex, we're just about out of time. Anything else you would like to mention, or anybody you want to give a shout out to?
Just want to quickly mention that I'm doing this series of Tales from the Trail, which are short pieces of fiction about dogs, mushers, and sled dog races. And you can search for hashtag Tales on the Trail on Twitter. And the third one went up this morning.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to listening to those. I haven't had a chance yet, but I'm going to listen to a few of them before tomorrow's episode. Maybe we can talk a little bit about it. Alex, it's always a pleasure talking to you about the Iditarod. We will see you guys that are listening. Will be on the air at 7 p.m. Alaska time tomorrow night. That's at 11 p.m. Eastern time. And until then, hit that subscribe button and you'll get all of our episodes right in your iPod or your podcast feed, wherever you listen. Thanks again, Alex. We'll talk again soon, okay?
All right. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you. On behalf of my co-host today, Alex Stein, this is Robert Forto. We will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company. Learn more at firstpaw.coffee.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for Dogworks Radio. Did you know that Alaska Dogworks trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska Dogworks on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.